Now, many people approach me on my website and other places every single day, and unfortunately I can't service all of those requests. But one of the questions I get asked over and over again, including people who have read about my investment minimums, is what should I look out for when it comes to a financial advisor? In terms of, so many people have said to me, well, look, Adam, I'm living in country X or country Y, I can't afford your minimums at the moment, but how about another company? Who would you recommend when it comes to another company? And I always say to them, well, do you want to DIY invest, do it yourself, or are you looking for an advisor? Now, if they're looking for an advisor, I give them some tips to look out for some of the best advisors. Now, number one thing I would say to anyone looking for an advisor is to focus on somebody who's a contrarian. Now, what I mean by a contrarian is this. As I've said in many of my other videos, and in fairness, this isn't just advisors. This could be lawyers, this could be doctors, this could be teachers, it could be anyone in society. It's human nature to do what's normal. Some people call it normalcy bias, some people call it, for example, cultural bias. So for example, an advisor in India is more likely to say that gold's a good investment, even though it hasn't been long term, because culturally, many Indians like gold. Or a financial advisor who's from the UK or Singapore is more likely to say property is a good investment for cultural reasons, Malaysia and some others too. If you can find an advisor who is a bit of a contrarian, that's usually a good sign. Let's say you find an advisor who's an Indian guy who's on YouTube, who is absolutely slating gold, despite the fact that in their culture it's quite normal, or a British advisor who's slating property. That's a relatively good sign because it shows somebody whose mind is agile, an open mind. That doesn't mean you have to agree with the position they're taking, but if somebody's willing to take a contrarian viewpoint, they're more likely to be forward thinking. They're more likely to do things which are different. And I'll give you a great example of this. For years, I've been saying on this channel, online and whatever, that I think a lot of things we do in the world, like face-to-face meetings, so on, are completely useless now. And I haven't been doing it for years because I know that when I'm on the buyer side, I definitely don't want to meet someone in person, right? Now, for years, many of these advisors would say, client relationships are best done face-to-face. But then suddenly coronavirus came around and it became normal, let's say, to do it. And everyone's jumping on the bandwagon saying, video conferences and all this. And it's like these people who are very much influenced by what's normal, it's kind of easy come, easy go. What they're advocating in 2020 is different to what they were advocating in 1999. They just move with the times. I mean, I remember when I was at an investment convention a few years ago, I spoke to many advisors, and one advisor couldn't believe it when I said, I don't usually meet clients face to face at all, and she was really amazed. But now she's putting out things on LinkedIn saying the way forward is to meet people in person. I think it's better to avoid those kind of people who just are always changing, not because they've just changed their mind, but because whatever's normal changes. Now, number two, I think portability is very important, especially if you're an expat. You do want an advisor or an advisory company where if you move or they move, nothing changes. In other words, let's say you're in, I don't know, Nigeria or UK or Germany, whatever, but you move countries in retirement or whatever, of course you don't want to be disrupted. So you do want portable solutions. In comparison, a lot of solutions are very country specific as well. And also response times. Ideally, you want someone who can respond to you relatively quickly. Now, number four, I would say avoid the bubble. What do I mean by that? In the UK, we have something called the Westminster bubble. What that means is, for those who don't know, Westminster is the Parliament, and Westminster bubble is when politicians speak in a kind of lexicon and they use words that the rest of us don't understand. They use jargon. And in fairness, everyone can do this. Lawyers, again, advisors, everyone can get used to using these terms. But out there, what we are thinking of as the consumer is often different to the bubble. And you might say, well, what's wrong with people using a bit of jargon here and there? Yes, there's nothing wrong with jargon in small doses. But what can often happen is that people can get in very regimented and narrow-minded ways of thinking. I'll give you an example. And a few months ago, somebody reached out to me and his investment wasn't big enough to satisfy my minimums. And he said, what would you look for an advisor? We got into a conversation, right? But then finally he reached out to me and said, Adam, I've been talking to an advisor But he's saying to me he can't deal with me because my residency is in the UK. And I said, yes, he can deal with you. But then he said, oh, but he's told me you have to be regulated in the UK to deal with me. And I said, that's not true. He doesn't have to be regulated for certain types of products. And I even showed him the kind of products he could invest in, and he could go back to that advisor and say, well, actually, you could be my advisor on this kind of product. And do you know what the advisor said? He was amazed. He didn't, even though he's a very well qualified guy, once he found that out, he was surprised. Likewise, 2 months ago, I spoke to a gentleman in Southeast Asia who's running a company there. And when I told him it would be perfectly possible and legal for him to live in Europe without X and Y license and do certain things in his business, he was surprised. He was delighted, and he was really thankful for what I was saying. But this leads me back to something that often what happens, and it's not just in advisory, it can be the same in law, medicine, I'm sure, that people start to think like this when the world is like this, right? And certain types of advisors, even very good ones, they just think like this. And that leads to them being very regimented in how they are thinking. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of this. I was also talking to another guy, and basically, to cut a long story short, he wants to invest in Bitcoin, only about 5% of his portfolio. And he likes his advisor and so on, and he does think he's a good guy and very knowledgeable. But one day he said to his advisor, I'm thinking about investing in Bitcoin, not through your portfolio, but maybe, doing it myself. And the advisor sent him a long essay, whatever. And the client got back to him and said, well, how about I invest in the platform you're suggesting? Because I actually read online, you can actually do it on the platform that you put me in. And the advisor got back to him and said, okay, if you really want to do this, it's against my advice, you can, but you have to fill out Form A, which shows that this is against my advice, Form B, Form C, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the day, he got really annoyed with the advisor, not because he didn't think his advice was useful, but he's thinking, I'm the client. If I want to do something, at least be open-minded to my suggestions. And I'm not going to come back and blame you in 5 or 10 years. I'm not stupid. I'm not an idiot. You don't need to tell me that Bitcoin could go to 0 or go to 100,000. I know the risks, the ups and the downs. But again, this advisor was coming from a very regimented background. It's a bit like me, right? If I was looking for somebody to do my, digital marketing or law or whatever it is, I always think it's useful to get somebody in who has a fresh perspective. I can remember about 5 to 7 years ago, I employed an intern, very little experience, just a smart young person. And that person coming with a fresh pair of eyes was like a breath of fresh air. Now, I'm not saying you should deal with an intern when it comes to your financial affairs. However, definitely avoid those people who are in what I would call a bubble. In other words, it could be the UK bubble. Some people are even in a London bubble or German bubble or Indian bubble, or it could be the regulatory bubble, or it could be they've got into the bubble of their company. But definitely avoid those people who are just engaged in following the herd, following the norms. Finally, I would say deal with somebody who has the decent amount of knowledge. Now that sounds very obvious, but I would say in this day and age with so much information online, somebody who's got good thought leadership should absolutely be considered. So it should go without question that you should deal with somebody who's got knowledge, but by definition, I think in the world we're living in today, somebody who's got a lot of material out there is much more trustworthy than somebody who is actually just relying on things like the qualifications or whatever.